So I'm Alan Walker. This is Chat Talent, and I'm delighted to have with me today Tim Sackett. Hello, Tim.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going really well, thanks. Thanks for joining me. I know it's really early where you are in the morning. So before we kind of kick off with the interview, and hopefully I'm not going to embarrass you too much, but I'm happy to admit I've always been a bit of a fanboy of yours since I came across you 2 or 3 years ago. But don't worry, I'm not going to go all Kathy Bates from Misery. I'm got a sledgehammer, and I'm going to let you go after this interview, and you'll definitely still be able to walk, I promise.
Awesome.
But that weirdness aside, let me explain. You're one of the people who inspired me to start doing what I've been doing since launching Chat Talent nearly 6 months ago. And I've known of you for a few years. And even though you certainly seem to know your stuff, as lots of others do, I think what inspired me more is you seem to have a lot of fun doing it as well. I think that's really important. And I'm also pretty sure at some point someone somewhere must have invented a cloning machine, as you seem to be everywhere, and getting a handle on what you do exactly, though, is a little tough. So, Tim, rather than me screwing it up, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, so no, thanks for obviously reading my stuff, and I always find that super flattering. So my wife calls me a micro celebrity. I'm only popular with like a very few people around the world. And I had my biggest claim to fame with my wife, because she doesn't really think I do anything either. So she doesn't, we were walking through the Detroit airport, and it's a big airport, and like the concourse is like a mile long, and we're going down one of those walkways that are kind of automated, and somebody's coming the other way, and they go, "Tim Sackett, are you Tim Sackett?" And I could say, immediately her head went down, like, "Oh, I'm never, like, your head will not fit into the airplane after this moment." They're like, "Oh, I read your blog." But that's the only time that's ever happened in my life. And just, I'm thankful, that my wife was right next to me from that standpoint. So I actually run an IT engineering staffing firm. So I'm a headhunter. My mother started the company back in 1980. I took over 9 years ago. So that's the full-time job, right? That pays the bills for the most part. And there's a big story to that. So part of that story was right out of college, my mother hired me as an entry-level recruiter and made me work a desk. And so I worked a desk for about 8 years. I thought I was really, really good. I was making a ton of money. And so I was kind of pushing her really hard to kind of retire so I could take over. Because, at 28, like, shoot, like, right, I'm ready to run the world. And she said no, and she fired me, which was probably in hindsight, when it happened, it sucked really bad. But in hindsight, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it forced me to go get a real job in talent acquisition on the corporate side of HR. And so then for a decade, I worked corporate HR, corporate talent acquisition jobs, and worked my way up. And really did learn that I knew nothing, right? Like I could recruit, but I knew nothing beyond that. And then, about 10, 12 years into my career on the corporate side, she had some health issues, and then came to me and said, "Hey, do you want to come back and run the company?" And really at that point, I felt like I was probably actually ready to do that, and still have learned so much over the last 9 years. But then when I was on the corporate side of HR, I had went from a really, really dynamic company, and then took a promotion at a healthcare company that was super conservative. And this is probably about 10 years ago now. And what I found was, like, I immediately knew I took the wrong job. But I couldn't change. Like, I was kind of stuck there, at least for a bit. And so I started writing, and how I started writing was I found Chris Dunn in the HR Capitalist blog. And this was, think about 10 years ago, there wasn't a lot of HR blogs out there. In the US, there was primarily Chris, Lori Rudiman, there's a handful of other people that were out there, but those were the kind of the people that I found. And it was funny because I found Chris's blog, and I didn't really even know blogging existed at the time, but I found his stuff, and I was like, holy crap, this guy writes exactly how I think in my head, but I would never say, right? Because I'm in this political kind of corporate environment. So I was like, so I sent him a message, like an email. He had his email address on there. And that's all I said. I go, "Hey, I don't even know if anybody reads your stuff," because it looked like a 10-year-old put the website together. And I told him that, right? Like, I'm like, I don't even know who this is. I don't care. And so I said, you write exactly like I think, like, I keep doing this. Like, I'll continue to read, even if nobody else does, and I just kept, hammering him like that. And he responded almost immediately with his phone number and said, call me, which at that point I knew nobody read his stuff because nobody would ever respond like that. But no, I joke.
Went up in the air. It's like, someone's contacting me.
Yeah. And I joke with him because we're super close friends now, right? So we had this, like, an hour and a half long conversation the first time we talked, and literally felt like we were kind of like separated at birth, kind of brothers. And I didn't even know if I could write. I mean, I wasn't a writer. I was, I kind of, just went to college and then got a job recruiting. And he's like, well, hey, you should write something, try to write something. And I've told the story a number of times, but, so I sent him two things. One was, something on like HR regulations and stuff. I wanted to show him like I was super smart in HR. And we can't even remember what it was because it was so awfully boring. It was terrible. The other thing I wrote was I had just come from Applebee's, the restaurant company, and I had tons of like logo information. Like, I had logo polos and jackets and bags and all this stuff. And then I went to work for a health system, and my wife was like, what are we going to do? Like, a third of my closet was like this logo gear from Applebee's. And so the post I wrote was, where does corporate logo wear go to die? Like, once you send this stuff to charity, like, where does it go? And the concept I had was I was going to be on an African safari, and all of a sudden some guy was going to be walking at me with my jacket on, like, the People Stacks Applebee's 2001 jacket or something. And he said, always write like that. That's brilliant. And then never write that other boring crap. Nobody wants to read that. And so for like the first probably 2.5 years of my blogging career, I was the Friday kind of, just make fun of HR and recruiting and all the stupid stuff we do on the Fistful of Talent blog, which Chris owns, which is a multi-contributor site. And then at one point he came to me and said, hey, you have just way too much stuff to write. Because I was also the fill-in. Anytime anybody else didn't have a post for that week, he would just call or send me a message and say, hey, do you have anything? And I'm like, oh yeah, like, I'll throw you something. I got a million ideas. So he finally, talked me into starting my own site, and then he came up with the name, the Tim Sackett Project, because I was super nervous. And I go, Chris, like, I don't want to start my own site. And then what happens if, like, 6 months into it, I'm done. I can't write. I can't find anything else. And he goes, well, let's just do a project and see what happens. And so then the project can end, right? Like, you can just say, it was a project. I tried it. It ended. And that was 7.5 years ago. I've written every day since. Probably
the longest project ever, though. You'd be beaten up by your corporate team if you're overrun by this for 3 years by now. Over budget, over time, everything.
Yeah. So Chris and I both, we talk about this a lot because it's hard to find. We have a lot of people that come to us and say, hey, I want to be like you guys. I want to write a blog. I want to do this. And so we're constantly looking for people because what we found was we both have a kind of a unique talent which is we kind of have this never ending flow of content. I mean, I literally have 20 ideas a day to write for a blog post. Like, it never stops. Like, every interaction I have, every podcast I listen to, every radio interview I listen to, anything I'm like, oh my gosh, there's 3 ideas about stuff I could write there. And so we both kind of, and then what the other piece of that is that we both write very fast. And I make fun of my grammatical errors because I'm not an English major by heart. And so I write fast. And then one of the things that he gave me early on was, you're going to write some stuff that's really, really good. And you're going to post that and people are going to love it. You're going to write some stuff that's just complete crap. And nobody will even, they'll not even acknowledge it. You'll just write it and it's out there. But then, 80% of the stuff you write, it's going to be 50-50. People will like it. People won't. It doesn't matter. It's just out there. And then some stuff you're going to write, you'll think is just literally a throwaway post that you just, like, it took me 10 minutes to write it. You threw it up there. You didn't even think about it. And all of a sudden it explodes with great content. Like, people don't even understand. Like, I wrote one last week and it was a stupid clickbait title, which was like something like my new favorite interview question. And it wasn't even about an interview question. It was really about hammering people who were deleting their Facebook profiles because I thought it was stupid that you would do that, right? I had 63,000 people that day read that post.
Wow.
It went completely viral, right? Because that's an outrageous number for a daily read for a blog like mine. I'm lucky to get 63,000 in a month, let alone one day. But then I also, like, I did the hugging rules like 3 or 4 years ago, and like over 1 million people have read that post. And again, it took me 10 minutes to write that stupid post.
It's hard to predict, isn't it? It's really difficult to
Yes.
say. You look at one piece of work and you think, wow, that's a masterpiece. I'm in love with that. It's brilliant. You put it out and it just kind of goes into a big black hole of silence, doesn't it? And then you chuck something else out, you think that's bang average. It's mildly amusing. It's a little bit edgy. It's okay. And it goes crazy. And it's like, oh, geez, how do I kind of wrap that up and recreate that every single time? And to a certain extent, there's a lot of luck involved, I think, and timing and mood and things like that, depending on who reads it when.
It is. I tell you, the times that my posts have gone real viral, it's usually LinkedIn. Their news feed somewhere will pick it up. Somebody that decides what content gets picked up in their news feed will pick up my stuff, and it will go crazy. And like, but you can't, like, I work, I have a good relationship with the LinkedIn team, and I've asked, like, hey, like, I'd like this every single day. How do we do this? And they're just like, yeah, it doesn't really work that way. Sorry.
So what, Tim, you talked there a little bit about your inspiration. You said, listening to other podcasts, watching the news, whatever it might be. Have you ever, firstly, are there anywhere else you get your inspiration from? But actually, more importantly, given how many blogs you put out there, have you ever written a blog, posted it, and then somebody said to you, Tim, you wrote pretty much the exact same blog 3 years ago. Have you completely forgotten?
No, I have over 3,000 blog posts written.
Wow.
And I bet 10% of the blog posts that I put up on my site every year now are posts that I rerun. So it's exactly, I mean, I just copy and paste, and maybe I'll do some updating a little bit. And then I'll just rerun them. And every single time I rerun them, they get more traffic than the first time I wrote them. Now, partly is because my audience continues to get bigger and bigger, like incrementally, right, over the time. And very rarely will I get somebody to say, oh my gosh, hey, you wrote that 3 years ago. I will get people to say, like, you've said this before. It seems like, because I always think, like, every good blogger probably has like 4 or 5 main, like, uniqueness ideas to them.
Yeah.
And we just keep rehashing them in different ways in different scenarios. Like, hey, Uber just had a sexual harassment thing, and boom, you put your idea into the Uber investigation, and somebody goes, oh my gosh, that's brilliant. And you're like, yeah, it's really the same idea I've had for like the last 10 years. But I will say, like, Jennifer McClure has a new podcast out, and she had William Tincup on, and that episode is awesome. If people who know William or listen to William, he's a brilliant guy. I know he's spoken in Europe a ton. But one of the things he said, because she talked about this whole kind of thing of like HR or talent acquisition, like thought leadership. And he goes, one of the things that he said, which is where I get my inspiration, what I do is I rarely read anybody in our space.
Okay.
And it's not because I don't think they're good. It's because I have my own unique ideas about talent acquisition and HR and stuff like that. And I know if I start reading them, that influences how I write. And a good example is I was at Greenhouse Open, which is, big ATS. They had Patty McCord, who's the former Netflix head of HR. She did the big Netflix, culture deck, which is like super popular, and you can look it up. It's an awesome thing. Well, Patty talked about equal pay and how HR owns it. And so on Equal Pay Day this week, I wrote a post and I talk about that, right? And I never gave Patty credit because in hindsight, I actually thought about that. I'm like, well, that's exactly where the idea came from. But you don't think about that when you're writing and how people influence you. And so I do get inspiration, but my inspiration comes from really outside of HR. I listen to a lot of tech podcasts. I read a lot of stuff in the technology space. I also, just in marketing in general, I do a ton of marketing stuff I listen to. And so I tend to get a lot of ideas there and then figure out, how do I put this idea into talent acquisition or HR?
I think that's a really good tip. But you can't spend too long reading other people's stuff, and not just the ideas bit, or even the core principles of the content, but actually the style. You can get, you can end up turning yours a little vanilla and diluted, can't you? Because you kind of think, oh, this guy's great at blogging. He gets loads of views, and he writes like this. Do I need to do the same? But actually, that's going to ruin it for you, and you'll start blogging will become then less of something that you find enjoyable and more of a job, because you're trying to replicate something, and it becomes less of a creative thing then, doesn't it? It becomes more of a transactional piece if you're trying to kind of mimic someone else's style. So sticking to that kind of theme of writing, you're ready to launch your first book, I believe, called The Talent Fix.
Yeah. So I always knew I could write a 500-word blog post. I didn't know if I could write a 60,000-word book. Those are a little bit two different animals, right? But I got asked constantly, like, oh, you should write a book, you should write a book, you should write a book. And then finally last year, actually at the end, like New Year's Eve, 2016, I'm not a big like resolution guy, but I made one resolution, which was I'm going to write a book in 2017. And to make sure, and my wife's a big goal person. I'm not a goal person. Like I don't write my goals down and do all that stuff. I always thought that was kind of a bunch of bullshit. But obviously the research shows that it works. And so I made a resolution, I made it public. And then I went out and actually signed a contract. And then had a drop dead date of delivery, October 31st of 2017. The manuscript was due. And so I went through the whole process and wrote a book. And the idea of the book, by the way, my first idea, they wouldn't publish. So that's going to be my second book, and I can't share it because I don't want anybody to steal it.
But once you've got that first book over the line that's more acceptable and people buy it, they'll be like, okay, people want to read this Sackett guy. So we'll put another one out now and he can have more freedom over
the first book was way too controversial for them. And so they said, we can't do that one, but we do want to do a book with you. So what's the book? And so they wanted to do one in the talent acquisition space. And here's what I knew is because I'm writing for so long, I get literally messages every single day from like corporate talent acquisition leaders. And it's always basically around the same thing, which is, hey, our recruiting's broken. Like, how would you fix it? Now, again, every single one of those questions is a different answer because everyone's broken differently. And so I turned it around a little bit and said, if you had me come in and say, Tim, we want you to come in and run talent for us. You're going to come run talent for ABC company, whatever that might be. How would you do it? And so literally the book is from A to Z. What would I do to begin with to how, I mean, every single step, like from day one, I come in to run your shop, or in day one, if you decide that, hey, you now want to run a modern recruiting organization, how should you present this? And, the first thing, like my first step is you need to have a conversation with your executive team to understand, is this what they really want? Because I go into a lot of organizations and what I find is the head of talent wants this, but nobody else does. They want more recruits. They want the jobs filled, but they don't want to really do the heavy lifting and actually change the mentality of the organization to be great at recruiting. And so that's my first thing is you have to have this conversation. And if you can't get that buy-in, get out of there, go someplace else, because you're going to knock your head against the wall for months, years, whatever it might be. And eventually they're going to fire you because you didn't get the job done. But guess what? Nobody's going to get that job done because they're not ready to recruit as an organization. And that's my first thing so my first question is, who owns recruiting? And if that executive team looks back at you and say, well, you own recruiting, then get out. You failed because you don't own recruiting. You create the engine that will help recruit, these hiring managers. The hiring managers actually own recruiting in your organization. And if you can't get your hiring managers to own it, and here's my example. So let's say you have a talent acquisition team of 20 people. You take them out on a team building trip. You put them on a bus. You go out on the bus gets hit by a train. You're all dead. So now you have zero talent acquisition team in your company. Does the company stop hiring? No, they won't, right? The next day, that hiring manager will have to figure out how to hire without you. And it'll happen. The company's not going to stop because 20 people died, right? It's a morbid thought, but it helps talent acquisition people really to get their mind around, oh, gosh, you're right. Like, I never make one selection of of a candidate. That's the hiring manager. And if you get your hiring managers to own talent acquisition, now your job becomes really great because now you can assist them, help them, and really prop them up to be successful in that role. But if they're saying, no, I take no responsibility in talent acquisition, it's all your job.
Yeah.
You're done. You failed.
So yeah, it's that buy-in is so important, isn't it? And I think if you've got them on board, and as you say, owning it, it just makes everything so much better because if they have ownership of it, it becomes their baby more, and everybody wants their baby to be beautiful, don't they? So they'll do everything to make that happen.
And if you think of every single pain that happens in corporate talent acquisition for a corporate talent acquisition team, it almost always relates back to that hiring manager. I can't get feedback from the hiring manager. I can't get the interview schedule set for the hiring manager. I can't get, and everything falls apart because the hiring manager is really the one that's the key ingredient to all of that. I argue right now that there's never been a time in the world history that it's easier to find talent. And in most organizations go, oh my gosh, it's so hard to find talent right now. No, it's super easy to find talent. It's super hard to actually get them to come to work for you. Those are two different things. I can find everybody in the world, but to get them to come work for us is a different animal.
Absolutely. It's a completely different beast, isn't it? So when's the book out, Tim?
So it's out soft launch next week. SHRM Talent in the U.S. is in Vegas. And so I'm speaking there and they're launching the book. You can go out to the SHRM store, so the shrm.org, and then they have a bookstore and probably pre-order right now and buy. And then probably mid-May to end of May, it'll be on Amazon. There's a little bit of a gap time where it takes Amazon some time to kind of put new books out because I'm not Malcolm Gladwell or anything like that. I'm not going to sell 1 million books. I'm hoping to sell 5,000 books, right, kind of thing. So eventually it'll be in May, and I'll really start to promote it probably then because for me it's probably more important that I get, good sales on Amazon than it is someplace else. So.
I agree. So this won't help you get to your 5,000 sales target. When shall I look forward to getting my complimentary signed copy?
Yeah. Sometime when I get my box of books sent to my office, right? Like I don't even have one myself yet. So.
But you are going hard copy as well as, are you doing a Kindle version of it as well?
Yes. Yep. There will be both a digital download and a hard copy.
Cool. So we've talked about writing. Let's talk about talking now. I understand you're coming over to the UK in a couple of months' time to speak at Sourcing Summit, or the better known really as SOSU UK, and that's one of your first, if not your first, European gigs as well, isn't it? Yeah,
it's weird. Like I get asked to speak a lot of times, and this is kind of how the whole speaking journey starts. Is I get people ask me the same thing. It's like, how do you become a speaker? How do you get on stage? Well, the very first thing you do is you volunteer to speak for free and actually show up for free, right? Like you just show up, and because every conference needs free content. And so you kind of start doing that, and you have to put your time in, and you have to kind of build this resume. And then you move to, okay, well, I'll come speak, but I'm not going to pay my travel. You have to pay my travel. And then you get to a point where you go, okay, like I actually get paid to speak, right? So you not only are you going to pay me to travel there, but you're going to give me a speaking fee. And so what I find is that in the US market, that's pretty understood. Like I'll get paid to go speak at conferences. Internationally, I'll get paid my paid travel.
Yeah.
And then usually a little bit of a fee, but not as much because it costs so much to actually have me travel there, right? So it's more. So it's kind of a wash. And so I've spoken kind of all over the world, but I never spoke in Europe, partly because I think the European market has so many great like HR and talent acquisition speakers that they feel like, well, if you want to come to the US to speak here, like, you can pay your own way. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. Sorry.
I love you, but I don't love you that much.
So Phil at SOSU reached out, said, hey, definitely, we'll obviously, pay to have you come over and travel and all that, and have you speak. And so I'm really looking forward to that. And I'll come for travel when I speak internationally because I have a wife who, and so I turn this into, she gets to come to me, right? So we've been to, Australia and South Africa, going to Europe. Like we've been all over the world, basically for free because I get to bring her along and it's a great vacation. So I have a really happy marriage. She loves me because I take her on these great trips.
That must be what I'm missing. I need to take my wife on more trips. So I understand though, you're not really a sourcer, are you yourself? What are you
No.
going to be talking to the kind of social audience about?
Well, so at Fistful of Talent, we have some great writers and a lot of people that have written for a long time. And at one point, a few years ago, we did a project where we said, what is it really? Because we all hire recruiters as well. And so in our minds, we were thinking, and we all were doing the same struggle where we would hire somebody and it seemed like it was a 50-50 shot on whether the person would make it or not, right? And again, this is more or less of hiring people that probably didn't have recruiting background. So if you hire somebody outside of recruiting, bring them in and turn them into a recruiter, why do we have this 50-50 kind of success rate? And what is it about the people that make it? And so we really started to dig into what's the core traits, the core DNA of the recruiters that make it in recruiting. And so what I'm going to speak about at SOSU is that those kind of 7 or 8 really definable traits that make an individual a great recruiter. So that, that great kind of DNA. And then if I'm a talent acquisition leader, or if I'm just a talent acquisition pro or recruiter, how do I increase those traits in myself? So if it's not something that's core in me, what are some of the things I can do to actually increase those? So that's what I'm going to speak about. And it kind of goes along in the book. I talk about those, that is a chapter in the book that I talk about it as well. I really talk about selecting your team and how do you choose your team? Because what I find is that most people that are recruiters in the US market that are corporate talent acquisition, corporate recruiting, they're not actual recruiters. They're hired to administer a recruiting process, but they don't recruit. And again, I know in the UK environment as well, there's a lot of third-party recruiting that does the actual recruiting for corporate, and that's changing. It's changing very quickly. And in the U.S. market, it's changing as well. But still, the vast majority of people in corporate talent acquisition roles aren't real recruiters. They're more of administrators of a process. And my thing is, when I would come in and take over your corporate talent acquisition shop, I'm going to turn you into an in-house agency. I'm going to actually have your recruiters recruiting. And so how do we do that? And what are those traits that it takes a person to actually do it? So I don't necessarily think just because somebody was a recruiter at a big company, oh, I was a recruiter at Facebook, so, oh my gosh, they must be great. I don't actually buy into that.
No.
In fact, I think probably if you're a recruiter at Facebook, you probably do less recruiting than anybody else because you have an unlimited top of funnel, candidate pool coming in.
Yeah.
So you have to administer a process better, but you're not recruiting. You're not actually going out and sourcing and actually going out and headhunting and actually going out and hunting. You're just gathering, you're a farmer, right? You're not a hunter. So.
No, I agree on that massively. I think it's way harder to hire top, whether it's tech talent or anything else, for a small unknown startup with relatively shallow pockets and no brand that anybody's really heard of or recognised that it is a massive corporate. Because you've got scale, you've got money in theory, both to pay for your recruitment process and tools and tech, but also high salaries. But you've also got brand awareness and recognition. Now that'll put off some people because they don't want to work for that kind of organisation, but it will also appeal to a whole group of people and certainly make it way easier to get your message out there and encourage people to at least come and look at you, even if then they say, look, I don't want to work for Coca-Cola or whoever it might be, but they've still heard of you. It's the first part of the battle, isn't it? Whereas a small startup hasn't got that. So it's with you entirely, it's a way more challenging role.
Yeah, and Alan, we both know too that the enterprise level has a different set of challenges, right? When you're dealing with hiring 100,000 or 200,000 or 1 million people a year, that's a completely different set of challenges.
Absolutely.
You might not have top of funnel challenge. Now you have this entire selection and screening challenge where now you have a great role you want to hire for, and instead of choosing from 5 candidates, you now have 5,000 candidates. And how do you get through that? Because I think that's another issue that I see on the enterprise side is, they go out there and they filter through and they'll say, okay, hey, hiring manager, here's, 10 great candidates that we have. And, and the hiring manager goes out and hires somebody. But the reality is maybe a week later, the actual best candidate applied and you never even looked at them, right? I mean, because they were number 499 to apply for that position, and they never got a breath of fresh air from you, but they were the actual best candidate that was out there. So that's a unique challenge to them, which I think some of us would go, hey, I wish I had that challenge, but
exactly. It's different challenges for different people, isn't it? None of it's easy, but it's different, and it's recognizing that difference, and you need a different person managing that process for you and driving things forward. So what about the role of a sourcer then? A little bit off topic, but relevant to SOSI, clearly. Anything going to be changing around that role in this kind of medium to long term, do you think?
Yeah. So before I say this, I have to say I love sourcing technology. I love the concept of sourcing, but I'm not a sourcer, right? Like I'm not one of these people that are going to be, building a 500-word Boolean search string and deep diving into the internet to find, some purple unicorn, squirrel, whatever. But I love those people because I think they're brilliant in what they do. What I'll say is for those people that can do that and are super deep diving, and people that will be, at the sourcing summit, people that will be at SourceCon in the US, and I would estimate that there's probably 1,000 sourcers in the world that are like that are super geeky, nerdy. I mean, They love this stuff, right? They know how to do all of it, and they have 25 Chrome extensions. They have they have all these all this stuff that they do. The rest of the world that has a sourcing title does not do any of that. They go on LinkedIn on a recruiter seat and they send emails all day and they call themselves a sourcer. That's not a sourcer. And so in my mind, the sourcing tech is actually improving so fast that within 3 years, sourcing as a function like we know it today will be dead. There won't be anybody out there because the sourcing tech can do it faster, cheaper, better than what sourcers can do now. Because if you call yourself a sourcer and that sourcing activity means I go on LinkedIn and I send emails, that's not sourcing, and I can have a robot do that 1,000 times faster, 1,000 times cheaper. And so I really think the sourcing function overall will change and start to adapt. And especially when we start to take a look at some of the data things, like is it RPPR?
GDPR, yeah.
GDPR, sorry.
Sorry.
All the Facebook issues, we're going to start to see over the next 2 or 3 years, and it's going to happen very quickly, that the data issues that we are seeing and facing are going to change how we can actually source as well. And people are going to go in and start locking stuff down in a much bigger way. So then if you think about, well, then how is sourcing for real 3 years from now? I think it goes back to like old school kind of stuff. And so here's an example. I have a buddy who is an engineer at a company. He graduated 10 years ago. He went to go work for the same company he did his internships with. And so he never even had to have a resume, never had to have a resume online, never had to have a profile on LinkedIn. He does have a social footprint, but he's always been very careful never to talk about his profession and never talk about, so he doesn't have his profession on there. He doesn't have his company on there. He just has basically his social stuff on there. So any sourcer in the world would not find him as an engineer. And yet he's a great engineer who's had consistent kind of promotion ability. And so a hiring manager would want that person, right? That's the engineer they want. That's the passive candidate that they want to hire. Well, the only way you find them is through networking, referrals, cold calling. Isn't that all what we did a decade ago? Isn't that old school sourcing? And what you find is that almost no sourcers will actually say that's sourcing. But to me, that's actually the modern version of where sourcing is going, given the data challenges we have, the privacy challenges we have, and then the technology will do all the light sourcing, kind of the easy sourcing will be done by technology. I don't need a person to do that anymore.
So you think we'll be leaning back again on those kind of relationship building skills that people had, and some still do have.
Turns out networking is pretty important, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked technology briefly there, and I spend most of my time with organisations who are asking me to help understand what's out there, particularly in the kind of talent technology space, and many of them want to become modern and forward thinking and really kind of cutting edge, but most of them aren't even aware of what's possible right now, never mind what's coming further down the line. And their future is often what's already possible. So I think HR and talent functions are getting better at that kind of stuff, but compared to other business functions, they still feel like they're kind of behind the curve. So why do you think that is? Why is kind of HR kind of last to go, so to speak, and more of a follower traditionally?
Partly because they had limited resources. So, and every year when you go through HR and talent acquisition budgeting, it seems like the organization, and this is a historical thing. I don't necessarily think it's like this the last few years because talent's been so critical, but I think HR and talent have always been a cost center. And so finance would come back and always ask for them to become leaner, give money back to the organization. Your budget should be less, not more. And so when that's the case is you can't miss on a technology choice because you rarely ever get that chance to actually go out and buy new tech. Or you're always HR and talent acquisition were always the ones to throw themselves on the sword and say, no, it's okay. We can wait another year before we get a new system, or we can, we'll, let marketing have that money, let operations needs it more than we do. And we'll do what we can. And we've just had this kind of a historical mentality that's been the case. And I think it's actually starting to come out of that because we see, now HR and talent acquisition become really a strategic kind of competitive advantage for a lot of organizations. But it's still so many of us who've been in the industry for a long time have a hard time going into a boardroom and explaining, hey, here's exactly what we need and why, because they're just confused. They don't dig into the technology enough to understand what's available, what's out there, and then how do we do it? And the noise has become so big over the last probably 5 to 8 years that the confusion level is through the roof. And so that they just disengage, and whatever vendor they have, they tend to have a relationship and they tend to listen to that vendor, even when that vendor is crap and they don't even know they're crap, right? They just go, oh gosh, this is the way it is. I get feedback messages from people, and they'll say, Tim, we're looking at getting a new ATS, or we're looking to buy a CRM. And I'll say, oh, great. And they'll say, so what do you think of this company, and whatever company that might be? And I'll say, yeah, they're fine. And they're like, well, we're getting ready to sign a contract. And I'm like, well, who else did you look at? Well, nobody.
Yeah.
There's nobody else in the market. And I'm like, no, there's literally 10 other companies that do the exact same thing. And by the way, these two companies actually probably do it better for your industry. And they're just like, wait, we had no idea. And even on the HR tech vendor side, I'll tell people, unless you're at the big enterprise side where you have RFPs and all this other stuff, most HR software is bought, and it's bought like this. We're either going to buy you, or we're not going to buy anything because we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. You're not actually selling against competition. You're selling against a no buy. We're just going to
buy decision, yeah.
Opportunity. We're going to keep the pain we have because they have no idea what the market is. So I'm an evangelist. I go around constantly asking and talking to talent acquisition and HR people and begging them just to go and demo software. I started this almost 4 years ago because I felt like I didn't know the HR tech space enough. And it's kind of like a Gladwell's 10,000 hours kind of example where I said, I didn't know. So the first year I demoed one product a month. It took an hour, and then I wrote about it on my blog. The next year I did 52, and so I did one every single week. This year I'll demo probably 150 different softwares. I'll write about 50 or so. But what I found was the HR tech vendor community actually taught me about everything, right? And they will tell you about your software. You can act dumb and ask a lot of questions, and they'll really tell you in kind of layman's terms, this is what this means. And it's simple stuff, right? As HR people, we hear like open API and we get like overwhelmed. Like, what does that even mean? What's open API? And again, vendors will try to talk through this and say, oh, well, don't worry. We have an open API environment. We can do anything. But then when you really start to understand what does that actually mean, and what does that integration mean, and how does this work? Once you demo, you learn all that stuff. And like what I find is HR people and TA people, they'll go, well, but Tim, if you demo a company, then their salespeople are going to call you nonstop and try to get you to buy. Just tell them no. Just tell them, nope, sorry, I'm not interested. Thank you, though. Love looking at the software, but we're not going to buy now. But go, you know what, call me back in a year. Maybe you have something new to show me, and I'll keep up on it. It's crazy to me that you could be an HR or TA leader in the space, and yet you really, you won't give yourself 1 hour of development a month into to the HR tech space when it's so important. And so what I find is that most HR organizations or TA organizations are allowing IT to select their software, and IT they could care less. They don't care. All they're going to select is something that's easy for them to actually implement and do, because they could care less what your business is. And so to me, the future of TA and HR is that we actually select our own software. We don't let IT select it for us, or finance, right? Finance now is making a lot of the HR decisions in terms of, hey, we're using Oracle, so you're going to use Oracle.
I experienced just that in my last corporate TA role, and it was frustrating to say the least. It was, we bought Oracle and they're giving us Taleo for free. I was like,
yeah,
so
great.
we've got to have it.
There's a reason they're getting it for free. It sucks.
Exactly. I think that's a really good point you make there. It's part of development, isn't it? So it's gone to the days when a bit of technology was purely there to be a system of record and help you to keep track of things. Now it's a genuine tool to help you get out there and find talent, to engage talent, to onboard talent, to move them all the way through that journey. So not understanding the technology is like not understanding the role of a recruiter, or the role of a sourcer, or the role of your recruitment administrator. If you lead that function, it's as important that you understand all the tools and technology that are out there as the people that make up the team, in my mind.
Yeah. Oh, no. And I use it now in my business. And when I go out to have a presentation for a new company, or we go through an RFP, RFQ kind of, presentation, I will spend probably a third to half of the time talking about my tech stack and recruiting, and how that's a strategic advantage to any company that works with us, because I know the way I have my tech stack set up that I can recruit higher quality, faster, better candidates against anybody else. I'll put my tech stack against any other company in the recruiting, IT, engineering, staffing space. And especially when you have other technical people in the room from the client side, they know that that's a true differentiator, because that's the one thing they want to know is what's different from your staffing company to another staffing company. And it's always, our people are different.
Yeah. We understand your market way better than anybody else. Prove it.
Yeah. We're all the same that way. What I know is I have a strategic advantage because I look at 150 different pieces of software, because I have these relationships in the vendor community, and I can get a lot of times I'm testing and beta testing software before it even hits the market, because they know I'll give them true feedback. They know my team is used to it, and testing. And so we're able to kind of plug and play a lot of different technologies into our tech stack before anybody else. And again, that becomes a major advantage. And I just think that continues to roll forward to corporate TA as well. I think if you're a corporate TA and you're in a competitive market, you better look at your tech stack as a competitive advantage. And if you're not, you're really missing out.
Absolutely. I guess what makes it difficult sometimes for anybody looking at HR tech is the number of vendors and products that are out there. On one hand, that's a blessing because it means there's choice. But on the other hand, unless you're in the thick of it on a reasonably regular basis, like you and me are, Tim, actually trying to get your head around it and knowing where to start can be a real challenge. So I guess that's where they need to lean on people who have got some of that insight initially to at least point them in the general direction of what's right or what's not so right.
Yeah, I hear that from every leader, is that the market is so confusing to them right now. And I think and what you find though is a lot of the HR tech vendors, they're so into it, right? Like they've created some great tech. Like again, I'm a nerd for all the tech. I love it. But they tend to talk over the head of the average buyer. The reality is a TA buyer, an HR buyer is fairly unsophisticated, fairly unsavvy to tech. And that's not a knock on my peers and my people. Like I love my people and my community, but we don't spend a lot of time in technology. So we're fairly unsophisticated when it comes to buying technology. So don't talk over our heads, right? Like really dig into and help us understand what it is you actually do. And not because but like most of the newer HR tech and TA tech is not being built by HR or talent people. It's being built by technologists who don't know what we do. And so they struggle to develop a story around the pain points that we really have. And I think that's one of the challenges that the community faces, is that, but again, I think, when I write about HR technology, I write from a layman's perspective. I try not to put in a lot of tech speak. And if I do, I try to explain this tech speak when I write about it. And I don't take money for what I write, right? So every single thing I write about, no one's paid me to write about. And so I think that's the other part of it. When we have, and again, there's some brilliant analysts out there that write about HR technology. Those analysts have a job that are being paid by the tech community, the vendor community. And that's what I think a lot of HR and TA people don't understand is when you read something from a Gartner or from a Deloitte, they're being paid by that tech community. Now they're not necessarily being paid one-to-one, right? Hey, if a vendor from Gartner writes about a piece of technology, my guess is that they're not actually getting paid by that vendor for that. But I can guarantee you that there's a project being paid for somewhere in their company by that tech company. And so you have to weigh about, well, why is this actually happening? Why didn't they, and that same thing, if they're writing about a CRM and they're writing about Smashfly, well, why didn't they write about Beamery and Ascendify and Avature? Why didn't they write about the entire CRM community, right? And so I always question that. Like, you have to be very careful about what you read, who you read, why you read, and then go, well, are they being paid by somebody? And do they actually talk about that? And it's hard to find people that are not being compensated by the vendor community that are saying, hey, here's why I wrote this,
It's really interesting. I downloaded a supposed white paper from a HR tech blog page, and I thought, oh, this sounds interesting. The title, it was a little bit clickbaity. It was a little bit wow, look at me. But I downloaded it and I thought, it's going to teach me something great. And I got through it, and it was written as if it was from the HR tech blog page. And they tried really hard to make it sound neutral. You could tell. You could almost hear the cogs whirring as every single word went down.
Until
every paragraph, every section where it's talking about a challenge, they kept recommending the same product for every single one of those challenges. And I'd never even heard of the product. And this is somebody who spends all day in this stuff. I thought this is so blatantly, obviously a sponsored mouthpiece type bit, rather than actually being something that's genuinely been written from scratch and completely agnostically.
Yeah, and I do, there's a bunch of those, and and you and I know read a lot of those, and there's a couple of them recently I know, and also I talk about 2 ATS vendors, right? So JobByte has an annual report out where they actually kind of take all the data from all the JobByte customers and roll it up, and they kind of give some really good some funnel metrics, right? I love those because I know even though it's a JobByte marketing piece, they're really showing me what should my funnel look like in terms of success and failure, because it's based on thousands of JobByte customers and millions of data points. So I will buy into that stuff. Now, again, do I know that's a JobByte marketing piece? For sure I do, right? Like I know I'm going to probably, but I also know the data's real. So I love those kinds of things. And JobByte's not the only one that does it. There's a lot of other ones that do it. Lever actually had a recent one as well. Lever's another ATS vendor for kind of SMB mid-sized companies. And they had one about talent acquisition metrics. And what metrics should you really be measuring? Now, of course, they're going to put metrics in there that they know their system actually measures. But it does start a really good conversation about, hey, if I'm a TA leader, what should I actually be measuring my team against and individual recruiters against? And some of the measures in there were really good. The things, what I like about it was they actually called out things like days to fill. Like days to fill as a metric is worthless. So why are we actually using that as a TA kind of industry to measure? But yet when you ask most companies, so tell us, what are you measuring in TA? The number one that they'll say is days to fill. Like, well, why? Like, what impact did that have on your organization? Well, Tim, if we fill faster, that's better. Is it? Maybe you're filling too fast, right? Maybe in a critical role, you should slow down. You'll get higher quality if you actually would take a little bit more time. Or maybe the reason your days to fill is so high is because you have your hiring managers sitting on resumes for 2 weeks before they actually get back to you, and your TA team has nothing to do with that, right? So it's like, I think that there's some good white papers out there, but like you said, some of them are so bad. And the hard part, again, is the confusion of our community to go, well, what's good, what's bad, and who's to tell us?
Yeah, exactly. It's difficult. Well, listen, Tim, thank you so much for your time. It's been awesome. It's great to finally meet you. As I said earlier, I'll let you get up and walk away. No Kathy Bates style here. It's been a real pleasure, my friend, and hopefully I'll be down at SoSo, so I'll get a chance to meet you face to face.
Nice. Yeah, we'd love to see it.
Nice one. Okay, my friend. Take care. Right. See you soon.
Thank you.
Cheers.